Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory, prices, and delivery of cards for Magic Online. We start each Top 10 by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Hi.
Ruben Bressler.
Hate you both.
So much hate. I am Evan
So much
Irwin.
hate. I'm getting in the mood before, I got to get limber and get the hate up for this episode.
Oh, it's going to get crazy up in here. Well, we also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most luxuriant and letting us know what card we didn't choose as one of our top 10 goblins. Ruben?
Well, we didn't receive hate so much as they don't hate us. They're just disappointed. We had a lot of comments this week about probably one of the top 3 mob bosses ever printed in Magic the Gathering, and I decided that this week's winner was going to be Green Myrtle, who writes, "Wow, you all missed my favorite Ravnica Planner Goblin, the most coolio gangster of goblins, Krenko Mob Boss. The literal army in a can for go-wide strategies or combo kills, my favorite EDH general, outside of Golgari colors."
Oh,
Which I thought Aaron would like.
Yeah, I was going through the YouTube comments the other day, and I was amazed at how many. I mean, it was like the Rebecca Gay scandal all over again of just Krenko, 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 Krenko. How could you forget Krenko, Krenko, Krenko? And I was like, I did not know that so many of you love Krenko. I was really surprised. Yeah.
Well, for those who don't know, it was printed 3 times so far. Magic 2013, Dual Deck Speed versus Cunning. Remember that one? That was a great title, guys. Good job on that one. Dual Decks Merfolk versus Goblins. It is 2 red, 2 generic mana for a 3/3 rare legendary Goblin Warrior. Tap : create X 1/1 Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. So you just keep tapping it, and it just keeps making goblins, and they get bigger and bigger and crazier and crazier. And that to me, I do feel bad. I feel like that should have been somewhere. I should have been at least a number 10, on somebody's list, that type of thing. This is a hugely impactful thing that I certainly was like, oh, it was like the Rebecca Gay thing, right? We were just like, this hurts. I felt a little cranko-ish on that one. Whatever. That point is, we're going to talk about our top 10 hate cards. Thank you very much to Green Myrtle for her awesome, or his awesome comment, whoever that happens to be. Get in contact with us. We'll get you your $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. Thanks for Cool Stuff who sponsoring that. Mm-hmm. So, hate cards. What's a hate card? How you define a hate card? That's sort of what we're going to talk about, because the more I kept looking at it, there's a lot of weird different ways you can define what a hate card is. Is it hate about a strategy? Is it all the things? Is it just the one thing?
Well, you also have anti-hate. If you play a strategy where you are expecting hate, you want to be able to fight the hate. You want to be able to next level the opponent. So there are straightforward hate cards, like say you're hating artifacts, you're hating a color. But if you're the artifact deck, you need to have something to deal with the hate that you are facing. And so I have a couple of those cards on my list. Things that aren't inherently hateful, but they're meant to clear the way so that you can keep going with your original game plan.
All right, so let's get started here with number 10. Aaron, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is a card that's about to come out very soon. It's going to be in Core Set 2019. It's a card I'm really, really excited about. Black tends to historically have a really hard time with the Eldrazi decks, with the Tron decks, with the Cloud Pose decks. And, really Black's answer to a lot of things is just to make you discard it. You can have things like Fulminator Mage, but these decks are so redundant that they're probably going to get that land back anyways, and you're really not going to make any progress in that regard. And once they drop something like an Ulamog or a Wormcoil Engine, casting a Murderous Cut on a Wormcoil Engine feels terrible, and so you just don't have any good answers to colorless threats that these decks tend to spit out. And I think this is a really clean answer to a lot of these things. And I'm really hoping this card takes off. My number 10 is Infernal Reckoning. So Infernal Reckoning is 1 black, which is fantastic. It's an instant, and it says exile target colorless creature. You gain life equal to its powers. This is a great answer to the Ulamogs, to the Wormcoil Engines. This is also great if you're playing against Affinity. You can deal with a really big Inkmoth Nexus. Deal with a Steel Overseer, things of that nature. A little bit of talk about what this could maybe do in Vintage. Shops has been dominant for what feels like forever, and this is just a really clean answer for a color that really hasn't had many great answers to these sort of colorless big mana decks, or even just the smaller artifact decks out there. And I'm excited for it. And the art is just so sinister. You see a demon choking an Eldrazi. Like, what?
Yeah, that's Swords to Eldrazi shares right there, and
Yeah.
they just couldn't make it cheaper. Like that's literally this is as cheap as it's going to get, and it just wrecks Eldrazi, colors, whatever. I appreciate these very again sort of scalpel-esque cards. We're providing you exactly what you're looking for when you want to stop a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they did a lot of this kind of aiming at older formats, but being able to print them in standard cards in Core 19, which I talked a little bit about with the reprints. Things like Scapeshift and Crucible of Worlds aren't going to be great in standard. They'll be amazing the further back in time you go. Same with this card. It's going to be okay in standard. I mean, there are scrap heap scroungers going around, but this is really aimed at Reality Smasher, Thought-Knot Seer, Arcbound Ravager shenanigans in Vintage. This can get rid of a Blightsteel Colossus. So yeah, definitely a really well targeted snipe, a great one mana hate card.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing I really like about hate cards that are really efficient. One mana instant hate cards, right, perfect.
Yeah, I got one sort of exactly that way coming up later. Yeah. Ruben, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is a bit of a weirdo. I think it's one of the first cards, one of the first creatures to really target a specific strategy. And it didn't call it out by name or anything. It's not as overt as some of the hate cards on the list, but certainly Skragnoth was a change in design dynamics of how Wizards R&D went about attacking formats. So Skragnoth was four colorless and a green for a 3/4 beast. It has protection from blue, and it can't be countered. It was even time shifted up in Time Spiral. It had a Friday Night Magic promo in 2003 because of how popular it was. It had a couple of appearances in decks. Most notably, it had 2 copies across 2 different decks in the recurring survival decks from Worlds in 1998, with Brian Weissman and Darwin Castle both having one of the Skragnoth in the main deck. Later on, Quagnoth called back to it in Future Sight. There have been a couple of other things like Scrib Ranger that give you that protection from blue. That one has flash, supposed to be and can't be countered. But this one was particularly aimed at the mono blue 20 counter spells, Andrew Cuneo, Stalking Stones control decks. And Mark Rosewater said in his design article where he looked back at Tempest that he looked at Skragnoth specifically because he was sick of playing against so many control decks and felt that they needed to have a card that they had at least some trouble with. And the solution was, his initial solution was it just can't be countered. But then there was a card called Duplicity, which would have allowed you to trade things, I think. Or maybe it was juxtaposed, or there was some way to take control of the Skragnoth after it wasn't countered, and so he gave it protection from blue as well, which I liked and appreciate. And Skragnoth to this day just sits in a very interesting position in my heart. That 4 toughness also aimed at those mono blue control decks because of the Stalking Stones being able to turn into a 3/3. Skragnoth can attack through those or block them. So yeah, I think that definitely an interesting milestone in hate card design.
Yeah, I think it definitely set the tone. I mean, we still see it today. The Carnage Tyrant, Skylasher, I think this was one of the first cards that, really put green in that place of this is how we're going to deal with those sort of decks, giving it the can't be countered clause, giving it the, the protection from blue in some cases. This was really the first, and I'm glad to see that it all worked out and it's become something that, we keep going back to.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, first of all, I mean, there were some crazy hate cards back in the day. So this is like a more sort of refined hate. It's not just all of this or all of that. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's just this thing. We know this is a problem. Here's something to help with it. I appreciate that every time you see can't be countered, it's either 2 things. 1, it's a control finisher, or 2, it's a big, dumb green animal. And it's going to come and destroy your face. And it's perfectly statted to do that in the time period in which it had.
Of course.
All right, my number 10 here is one of those classic hate cards. This is one of those cards that kind of sort of gained notoriety. The longer that it was out, the more that it got played, the more that it got played against the deck that it was made to be played against and hated against. And it just becomes such an awesome staple that it never kind of went away. And maybe not so much these days. It had a certain day in the sun, if you will, or a day in the fire where it didn't get burnt, or maybe it just walked on it. Maybe we could just have Core Firewalker be my number 10. This card's fantastic as a hate card. 2 white, 2/2. Hate bear. A uncommon from World Wake originally. It has protection from red, and whenever a player casts a red spell, you may gain 1 life. So it just gets you coming and going. Like, you ain't going to get rid of it from the mono red deck, and whenever they play anything, you're like, awesome, thanks.
Yeah, I remember last year I played Burn on an April Fool's Day stream, and I had a couple of friends in the chat who were helping me, and we were facing somebody that was on a Collected Company deck, and they ended up playing Core Firewalker, and chat was like, pack it up, and I was like, there's got to be something I can do, and they were like, no, girl, you have literal nothing. Like, unless you're running Kozilek's Return, and that's pretty niche, and Burn typically doesn't bother with that. Jund might, but Burn won't. They're like, you literally have nothing. And so I'm always happy to see someone stick it to Burn, so this card is fantastic.
Yeah, at least you're
I've beaten
packing
a
the
couple
Ghost
of Core
Fires.
Firewalkers in my day as a Burn player.
Oh.
The typical way to do it is you attack with one of your 2/2s and then cast Skullcrack at their face.
Oh.
And
'Cause
so,
the damage
they
can't be
block. They're
prevented.
like, haha, block your Goblin Guide or your Eidolon. And then you're like, okay, Skullcrack, you take 3, kill your sideboard card. Nice deck, idiot. And also, Burn decks can play this in the sideboard as well, which I love. Mirror Match or for facing against other red decks. Core Firewalker, boy, is it beating, though. It is one of the best sideboard cards against the Burn deck that you could possibly imagine.
I love how at the end of that Skullcrack play, they go, I'll gain life. And you're like,
sure.
Whatever, man. Whatever.
I will trigger the ability to at least only take 2 damage and lose my sideboard card.
That's correct. All right, so let's move on here to number 9. Ruben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is a card that I love for a number of reasons. First of all, Urza's Legacy coming back. I'm just a big fan of all the Urza's Legacy stuff. Reprinted in 7th edition, so it had another day in the sun. Yet again, another F&M promo. This was a card that was in the sideboard of a World Championship deck as well. I'm not sure exactly which one, though, because I can't read the signature on it. But it was also in the sideboard of Tomoharu Saito's Merfolk deck from Grand Prix Columbus in 2010. And he pretty much splashed black exclusively for Engineered Plague.
Nice.
Sure, he had some other ability to use his Underground Seas, but Engineered Plague was the real reason why. Why did we want Engineered Plague? Well, it's a 2 colorless and a black enchantment originally, as I said, from Urza's Legacy. As Engineered Plague comes into play, choose a creature type. All creatures of the chosen type get -1/-1. Pretty simple. The choose a blank cards are pretty niche, good for hate card fodder. Things like Gideon's Intervention or the recently banned Sorcerer's Spyglass in Standard, all the way back to things like Meddling Mage, and I'm sure we'll talk about all this kind of stuff going. Sabo's Decree is another great one that was near the top of my list. But Engineered Plague, really hyper-focused. You can name Human or Wizard, I think was the main reason to have Engineered Plague here, to be able to knock off things like Confidant. You can name a Sliver, which Hooks was a popular deck back in the day. Elves is another great one. Just anything that has a lot of 1/1s lying around is typically good with Engineered Plague.
Yeah, this is another card that, we don't see exactly the same as this, but again, the sort of Curse of Death's Hold, the Knight of Souls Betrayal, the sort of the black, these anthem effects, these bad anthems of all your creatures get a little bit smaller. This was one of the first, and this one was narrowed down by creature type, and this card's fantastic. I love seeing it. I tend to see it more in Legacy, but when I do see it, it's always a treat. It's sort of like, what are you going to name? And that's a really cool effect.
Every Pauper player is like, please, please,
Yep.
please, just one time let me name elves with this in Pauper.
Well, I know in Standard we had Virulent Plague, I think it was, where like tokens got -2/-2,
Right.
and then we had Illness in the ranks, and so we sometimes get like watered down versions, but a common version would be sweet.
Yeah, there's Dread of Night. There's lots of effects similar to this one, but this one has always been the most popular.
And also some of the most flavorful. The idea, I think it was Volrath, of like who literally just created plagues to like deal with certain races and species is very diabolical.
Wow, that's pretty super villain for you there. That said, Aaron, what's your number 9?
I've been in the business of raising the dead for a long time, and I've seen it all. I've been scavenger oozed, I've been containment priested, I've been ley lined, I've been caged, I've been relicked, I've been spellbound. If there's a way to get rid of a graveyard card, I've had to deal with it. I have not, however, ever had the pleasure of dealing with this card. And I gotta give credit where it's due. You know, I talked a little bit about in the past, I had to tip my hat to Yixla Jailer just because it's so bizarre and just the way that it deals with bizarre. You're welcome.
Wow.
Plan that. But just, you know, I have a respect for the unique ways to deal with the graveyard, and Yixla Jailer is one of them, and my number 9 is another one. And my number 9 is Wheel of Sun and Moon. So Wheel of Sun and Moon is a hybrid green-white. You can do 2 green, 2 white, or some combination of that from Shadowmoor. It's an enchantment, and it's enchant player. If the card would be put into enchanted player's graveyard from anywhere, instead that card is revealed and put on the bottom of that player's library. So it's a very unconventional way of dealing with graveyards. You know, it's not stopping you it's not like a cage effect where things are trapped in your graveyard. It's not a thing like a ley line. You're still able to do everything you want to do, but if anything, it feels kind of worse because it's just a whoop, 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 whoop. And it's just so unique, and it's something I've never ever had to face before. I don't want to face it necessarily, but I have to give credit where it's due to very unique effects and just very unique ways to deal with graveyards, as opposed to the typical nukes and the typical, just the hierarchy of graveyard hate. This is really up there, and I have a lot of respect for this, and I think it's great.
It hates a lot of stuff in a very efficient way. It hates all Persist, Undying, all of that. All of those shenanigans get shut off almost immediately. It's only had 1 printing in Shadowmoor, currently a $6 card. I don't think that's going down because it's still great in multiplayer play. Because you enchant a player. I like enchant players. I would like to see more enchant player cards. I think they're really interesting when they kind of change how the game works just for them in a positive way for you, of course. But yeah, this one is a fantastic hate card. All right. Let's move on here to my number 9. And my number 9 was supposed to be the fixer. It was supposed to get us out of the problem. That's what it was meant to do. We had a problem, took a while, got an answer, and we're like, this is it, guys. They're all done. They're dead. You're done. You're finished. This is it. Not only are your stupid Bitter Blossom tokens gonna die, you can't counter Volcanic Fallout. Volcanic Fallout does whatever it wants to do. You're not going to miss bind click, and you're going to miss bind click and response, aren't you? And that's exactly what they did. Volcanic Fallout is 2 red and generic mana for an uncommon instant originally from Conflux. It can't be countered. It deals 2 damage to each creature and each player. This was supposed to be the savior. This is the one that stops the fairy menace. Fairies must be stopped. And don't get me wrong, it was good. But it didn't kill the tier 1 best deck in the format. It just attacked it from a different angle. A lot of 5-color control deck players back in the day, because you had the Reflecting Moon with all the Vivid Lands. You could just play whatever the hell you wanted. Volcanic Fallout just slipped right in there. And again, this was the savior. This was the end of fairies in Standard. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not even close.
This is a good one in the long and illustrious history of late printed hate cards that are specifically designed to try to answer specific things in the format. Perhaps the best example of which is Kataki, War's Wage, which we may get to later. There's also the most recently printed Sun Chaser from Core M19, which gets rid of your energy tokens, and there's a long list in between, Volcanic Fallout being one of the best examples. It got to the point, by the way, where Fairies was playing 2 copies of this card in their sideboard.
Are you serious?
Yeah, because they had the mana for it, and they needed a way to answer Magus of the Moon. And so they wanted to have a way to finish things off, or at least they could bring them in against other Fairies decks too. This is another one. Fairies at a certain point became the Borg. They were like, oh, Great Sable Stag? Yeah, we'll play those. Volcanic Fallout? I'll take some of those as well. Shock to deal with Magus of the Moon? Yeah, I'll put those in the sideboard as well.
All the tools that were supposed to stop them just made them stronger.
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
Bad. Oh my.
Yeah, resistance was futile is basically the moral of that story. Volcanic Fallout, though, great card. As a Kithkin player, I also hated playing against Volcanic Fallout because it could sweep the Wizened Sen, which then shrunk my Gold Medal Stalwarts back down to size, and then I needed my Burrington Forge Tenders. But unfortunately, when no Forge Tenders were to be found, Volcanic Fallout was quite the beating.
Yeah, it was terrific, but not in the way we wanted it to be. Not in the good way. Moving here to number 8. Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is a card that came out a long time ago. I remember seeing it back when I was a kid, back when I was a teenager, because it originally came out in Urza's Saga. And it started to see play in the last few years, specifically around the time of Eldrazi Winter. It was a card that people were keeping in their sideboards. The Eldrazi decks in particular were keeping it in their sideboards as a way to deal with opposing Eldrazi decks. If you are a creature deck and you want to be able to win the race against another creature deck, or just to sort of win the race against anybody, this is a really great way to do it. This is one of those cards that you have to kind of remind yourself is in Modern, because a lot of people don't remember it. Todd Stevens loves to tell people to main deck this card. Knock that off, Todd Stevens. I don't really appreciate that. My number 8 is Worship. So Worship is 3 and a white. It's an enchantment, and it says damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 instead reduces it to 1 if you control a creature.
Yeah.
So if you're playing Eldrazi and you have a bunch of really big Eldrazi that you know, creature decks tend to not really run removal. Their form of removal is just sort of running creatures into each other. And so if you know that your opponent doesn't have very many ways to get rid of your things, you just sort of drop that. And a lot of decks can't answer a Worship, especially if you're running it in the main deck. It's usually a surprise coming out of sideboards. I know my friend Kat had a feature match the other day. She was playing Bant Spirits, and she was playing Burn, playing against Burn. And she decided to board in Worship, and the Burn player was like, you got a lot of creatures, and I don't have enough burn spells, and this isn't going to work. And it was really great to watch her stick that and then have her creatures survive for Worship to do its thing. And very problematic card, but a very great way to sort of, make sure you're going to stick around if no one has a way to deal with your creatures.
Back in the day, I was a PTQ player. And,
really?
Oh yeah. Many years. Thank you.
Whoa.
Many years of traveling all over to battle. I wasn't that good. I was fine. I was solid. When I at my best, probably maybe a 6.57 out of 10. That's probably all I got.
As Emma would say, you were earning the medium bucks.
Yeah, I was the local end boss. You know what I mean? Of my friendly local game store, I was the good player. Okay, great. Then you get to the larger pool, and you're like, you suck. Regardless, the point is, I was playing in an extended PTQ. Okay, and I was very excited, because I was playing green-white. I lost game 1. I boarded in my Worships, and I was playing with Troll Ascetic. So Troll Ascetic plus Worship against Affinity is just the GGs. That's where we're at. I was playing against Affinity. I was really excited, and I was dying. Like, I was getting crushed. And I was like, I've got 1 turn to draw the Worship, and this is it. I got 4 mana. I got 1 turn. I'm at like 1 life. Here we go. Draw it. It's Worship. I'm flipping out. I slam it on the table, and then they go, blue, colorless, delay. And I'm like,
yeah. Yep.
Ouch.
It was
a good one.
It hurt. Because
I bet.
You know they paid for the French ones, right?
Oh.
Of course.
That's a retard.
Retard.
Yeah.
Retard.
That's terrible.
It was bad.
The French ones.
It hurt me. It hurt me
that's
bad.
pretty bad.
Knocked me out of the
That's
tournament and
bad.
everything. That was my O2.
Man, Worship is a beating. Like, some of these hate cards will go through, and it's like, I can reasonably beat an Ancient Grudge as an Affinity player. I can have an expectation to beat Thalia as a Storm player. Like, I have outs, right? There's just nothing you can do about Worship against the decks that Worship's good against. Like, there's just no way anyone ever beats a Worship. It's another burn card. The Eldrazi decks have a lot of trouble against a Worship. That's a great one. And when you're paying 4 mana, as V. Mauschwitz used to say, if you're paying 4 mana, it should win the game by itself.
Well,
and Worship does that.
Absolutely. Ruben, what's your number 8?
Well, I have Zvi on the mind for a specific reason, because of my number 8. Zvi Mauschwitz came to prominence for a number of reasons, but primarily was from his win at Pro Tour Tokyo in 2001 with a deck called The Solution. It was a boring-looking mishmash of common and uncommon creatures and some fact or fictions and some counter spells. It didn't look like much, but he won that Pro Tour over the likes of Tsuyoshi Fujita. Dave Williams made the top 8 of that Pro Tour, and several others, because of his mishmash of blue and white common creatures and uncommon creatures, and chief among them was Crimson Acolyte. You want to talk about old school hate cards that have come a long way? We already talked about Core Firewalker. Well, Crimson Acolyte was the first to really be the targeted guy. So Crimson Acolyte is a colorless and a white 1/1 human cleric. It has protection from red, and pay a white. Target creature gains protection from red until the end of the turn. Zvi thought that everyone at that Pro Tour was going to be bringing Skizzics, and he was not wrong. The top 4 of that tournament, the other 3 decks all had Skizzik. I believe that 5 of the top 8 had some amount of Skizzik in their deck. The red-green Stompy deck was really popular at the time, and Zvi Mauschwitz brought his Crimson Acolytes, his Galina's Knights, and his Voice of Alls to the tournament. And after the tournament, when he was like, I famously said that a spell, if it costs 4, it has to win by itself. Voice of All costs 4, doesn't win by itself. I think that that's an outdated sentiment now. I think that what he said actually was that it was patently ridiculous at this point. But Crimson Acolyte has a place in my heart for not only being a metagame choice and winning a tournament, not just a tournament, winning a Pro Tour as a 4 of, but it solidified Zvi in the minds of deck builders and Magic players everywhere.
Yeah, this is one of those that it's very much a precursor to Core Firewalker. Like, it hurts the red decks, but it doesn't really hurt them. Like, it doesn't, take 10% of their life every time it gets through type thing, which Core Firewalker does. It doesn't bring you back in life totals. It gives other creatures. And this is a powerful card that does see a lot of sideboard play in Pauper, because, there's a mono red deck in Pauper, and you can play this thing and start giving your other creatures protection. Not as popular as some other options, but still, I've seen it.
Also a decent drag name, Crimson Acolyte.
It's true.
I like it.
Pretty decent. Well, I for my number 8, decided to choose a card that has only been printed once, and it hates a lot. Like, sometimes you find hate cards that are just like, take the strategy and just get in there, stop them, or you're going to take this thing and you're going to stop this thing. Sometimes you stop things on literally all types of cards, all manner of cards, even if it's, I guess just all manner of a certain type of card. But when you play a Torpor Orb, nothing happens with creatures. Nothing. Who are entering the battlefield that have abilities. Torpor Orb is 2 generic mana, a rare from New Phyrexia. It's an artifact. And creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So it's not even necessarily themselves. It can be other things. It can be, other things that are relying on you to play other things and whatever. Like, this is just, it's a weird kind of hate card that just, it hates a lot of weird stuff. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's really unique.
Yeah. This was a card that was seeing sideboard play back when Splinter Twin was a thing in Modern. This was one of the ways you could deal with it. It helped against cards like Restoration Angel, against a lot of the Birthing Pod decks, because a lot of their triggers were enter the battlefield triggers. This is always one of those cards that I was surprised didn't see more play. Like, when I go back and I look at what the decks, what decks were popular back then, I'm like, why weren't more people running this? And in Commander, it definitely can see some play as well. I have a friend who plays Phage, and it's very important for them to have this card, because otherwise they die to Phage. And so there's some really niche uses for this card, but I'm always just surprised it never saw more play, because, like you said, it's so versatile, and there's so many things it could have affected.
Right. It stops so much with so little.
It was really popular in the red deck and the red-black aggro and the vampires aggro decks in Standard, to be able to deal with the Birthing Pod decks, to be able to deal with the Twin decks. It even shuts off things like Squadron Hawk. It did a whole lot, and then, of course, started seeing play in Modern, especially against the Twin strategies. Very popular sideboard card in Bogles, for example, because a lot of folks bring in their enchantment hate against Bogles, but you play this artifact and it shuts down their strategy and it avoids the back to natures and the things like that. Also sees a little bit of sideboard play in the other artifact-y kind of decks that can search it up, things like the Tesserator decks or the Lantern Control decks. Maybe even Affinity, although that one's less you can't really afford to play a 2-mana artifact that doesn't attack for 10.
I don't know. They're splashing for Rest in Peace now, so you'd be surprised what they can do.
Well, fair enough. But yeah, Torpor Orb, absolutely unique, super interesting. Shuts down the Titans, shuts down the Twin strategies. All those come into play abilities. It's a great one.
For the low cost of 2 generic mana. So let's move on here to number 7. I don't have one. It's one of my only 2 hires on my list. But Ruben, do you have one?
I do. Speaking of 2 mana, or 4, or 6, or 0, we're going to talk about Chalice of the Void now.
No!
Nice.
No.
Because Chalice of the Void, look, you want to talk about hate cards. Let's talk about hate cards, all right?
Hating.
One of the few hate cards that is so good at what it does that there are even decks that just use it in the main deck as part of their main strategy. Sure, there are Merfolk decks and Landstill decks and Eldrazi decks that have it in the sideboard, but you want to talk about a card that has an impact as a hate card, not just as a sideboard card. It hates on formats. It hates on everything. And so if you're able to play, Chalice on 1 against Grixis Delver, against Storm, against anything that relies on 1 mana spells, Chalice of the Void's where you want to be. So Chalice of the Void was originally printed in the Mirrodin expansion. It costs XX for a rare artifact. Chalice of the Void comes into play with X charge counters on it. Whenever a player plays a spell with a converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell. Just an extremely powerful effect. It was a Kaladesh invention, reprinted because of how notable it is. Also was an M25. So notable for both of those reprints, I think, and also one of the Masters, the Modern Masters expansions. Chalice of the Void is a staple of the prison, the mono red stompy kind of strategies, dragon stompy, things like that, alongside with some other cards that we'll probably talk about later. Just super good at what it does, amazingly efficient, especially with things like your double lands, things like City of Traders and Ancient Tomb. And by the way, you can play it for 0 to counter Aaron's Lion's Eye Diamonds if you really want to.
So good. It was a mythic from Masters 25. One of the only good things about that set.
Restricted in Vintage.
Yep.
Thank God.
Restricted hate card. That is a tough thing to do.
Yeah, this is a card that the Eldrazi decks in Legacy love to play. They love to run 4, and when you're playing things like Simian Spirit Guide, you're able to kind of get this card out a lot faster. And it's very important to remember that if you're playing in paper, you want to make sure your opponent catches it. I seem to recall there was a popular feature match at Patrick Sullivan where he was playing Burn, and his opponent was on Chalice, and it's very important that you make them get that, because if there is a possibility that you can cast a spell, and if your opponent doesn't catch it, game on. And so it doesn't really work on Magic Online as much, but it's definitely something you want to make sure your opponent's paying attention. And I can't tell you how many times I've had someone Chalice for 1 and then get their own Grafdigger's Cage countered, and it's like...
That's on every Magic player's bucket list. If you play Magic the Gathering and you've not played against somebody who played their own Chalice on a number and then literally ran something right into it, that is a classic. You need to have that experience before you die, because it's just so good. You're just that.
My friend Chris loves to run it in Mono Blue Tron, and they've cast it for like absurd amounts, like Chalice for 5 against Ad Nauseam. It's just hilarious what you can do with it.
Oh my God. Yeah, Chalice of the Void is flexible, powerful. I mean, just incredible. It's already has a $60 price tag, $50 from Masters 25 for a reason. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Aaron, what's your number 7?
My number 7 was a preview card that we got fairly recently, and I remember after the show was over, we'd recorded our usual Wednesday show, I remember getting a lot of condolence messages on social media, like, girl, I'm so sorry that was your card. And I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, this card's awesome. Like, I'm not normally speculator girl. I don't know anything about finance. I don't know what cards are going to be good in formats. I have no idea. But this was a card that I looked at, and I remember being really excited about it, and I was like, there's something here. And everybody around me was like, oh, no, girl, I don't know. And cut to today, where this card has become a staple of Legacy Dredge sideboards, and is going to continue seeing play as long as Reanimator keeps picking up steam. My number 7, Silent Gravestone. So Silent Gravestone is 1 colorless. It's from Rivals of Ixalan. It's an artifact. It says cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities. But you can also pay 4 colorless and tap it to exile Silent Gravestone and all cards from all graveyards, and you draw a card. You have not lived until you've dropped this against a Reanimator deck and you watch them squirm, because just about every reanimation spell they play, animate dead, reanimate targets. And they only run 4 exhumes, and if you're playing Dredge, they probably board out the exhumes because they don't want you to get a creature too. So you slam this thing down and you laugh, and it feels great.
Wow. And they're just like, gotta find that Echo in Truth.
Gotta find me exhume, and it's fantastic. And this is one of the few cards that I actually got right, that I saw a little bit of potential with. We were in a Legacy where Deathrite was everywhere, Surgical Extraction was everywhere, and this was a card to sort of answer the hate, to sort of protect you can keep things out of the graveyard, but at the same time, this has a nice kind of ground seal effect of protecting what you have, where you can't you can't Deathrite it, and when that's 90% of the graveyard hate you're facing, this is a great sort of way to deal with that.
Absolutely. So
I was really upset that we didn't get more on the Grim Captain flavor
Yeah.
line from the Ixalan expansion. Maybe when we return to Ixalan and do more Pirate World, we'll get a little bit more on the Davy Jones of Ixalan. Because the flavor text, made to ward off the Grim Captain and silence the lure of undeath, that sets up a big bad evil guy that we never got to see much of. And we had the Grim Captain's Call, and we had some other stuff like that. So I'm hoping that when we return to Ixalan, we'll get some more of that. And Silent Gravestone fits right in.
I agree.
That's great. So let's move on here to number 6. And I didn't have a number 7, so I'm going to talk about my number 6.
Okay.
Now, back in the day, back in the McDizzle, if you will.
I won't. That's not one I will do.
We're way back. They used to have serious, crazy hate cards. And I mean like cards that would take your hopes and dreams and crush them to a pulp.
I'm listening.
Cards, for example, and this isn't my card, but cards, for example, maybe we talk about, who knows? Like Flash Fires. It's a 4-mana spell. It destroys all planes. You know, they just had that stuff. Hey, you're playing white mana. I get you.
I recently played a copy of Boil in my sideboard.
Yes.
Wow, it's a good thing you just named my number 6, because my number 6 is Boil. And that's fine. And this is why. I had totally forgotten. This card is an instant. This is instant speed. Listen to this and think about it. If you haven't heard of, you haven't heard a lot of old Magic cards. This card's insane. Red and 3 generic mana for a instant uncommon from Tempest. Destroy all islands. Instant speed against the blue deck. Destroy all islands. I hope you have a counterspell so I can do it again at the end of your turn next turn. So you have to tap out so I can play whatever I want during my turn. Like, this card it's just crushing. It's just straight up crushing. And it's in 8th edition, which means it's in modern.
Which means it's in modern.
Which is hilarious.
Yep. Yeah. When I played Living End, Living End used to really struggle with control decks, and so one of the ways that we used to try to deal with it is we would run 4 copies of Boil, and so at the end of turn we would do Boil, and it's like, you can counter this, but then you're going to blow your counter spell on this. I'm going to untap and cast Living End and do what I came to do. And this was another one of those cards that you have to remind yourself, is that one illegal? And then you're like, oh hell.
There's also an Amonkhet Invocation Boil, which I think is delightful. Yeah, the art's great. I mean, the more we look back on the invocations and we were like, I'm not so sure about Hazaret the Pervert, but we look back at them now and we're like, wow, they went off. Like, kudos to them for taking this experiment and going with it. I played one copy of this in the sideboard of that mono red prison deck that I was recently playing in Modern. And initially I was like, I'll just play a Boiling Seas, because that was printed in Portal, and I want to have the super cool version. And then the guy that I borrowed decks from was like, Boil is just that, but instant speed, right? And I was like, oh my god! How add this one to the list of cards that are instant for no particular reason. I did the same thing with Nexus of Fate, with the Buy a Box promo for Core 19. I was like, 7 mana Time Walk, I'll take it or leave it. And someone was like, bro, it's an instant. And I'm like, oh my god! What in the world? They just don't print this effect at instant speed.
Yeah.
You're not kidding when you say that hate cards used to hate things. Like, I had Gloom on an early version of my list. I don't know if we'll talk about that later. Things like Karma. When they printed hate cards back in the day, they printed hate cards. They hated a thing in particular, and Boil is a great one.
Yeah, if you're on the end of whatever that hate card back in the days used to be, like, you got obliterated. You didn't just get, like, hurt.
Oh,
like, they chopped you off with the knee. Like, you were done. Oh, my God. Ruben, what's your number 6?
My number 6 is brought to you by one Mr. Collins Mullen, who went into a Modern tournament last October with a deck that he brewed up. He then proceeded to give that list to his roommate. He and his roommate both made top 4. He won the tournament thereafter, and he went undefeated through the Swiss with a previously unknown Modern deck, 5-color humans. And one of the best and most important cards in that deck is my number 6, which is Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. The queen of the hate bears.
I have nothing nice to say.
One of the big reasons why that deck operates. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, is a colorless and a white legendary creature human soldier. It's a 2/1 with first strike, and non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Thorn of Amethyst has been a popular card in Vintage for a long time. Wizards of the Coast has recently started doing things where they take popular sideboard cards or strategies and staple them onto 2-mana 2/1s in white. And Thalia was really the forebear of that, the first one that they really did that with. Thalia is a staple of Legacy Death and Taxes, of modern Hate Bears and modern humans. It was also a huge powerhouse in Standard during her time there. Never won a Pro Tour in her Guardian of Thraben form, although Heretic Cathar did win a Pro Tour as a one-of in Lucas Esperberto's Mardu Vehicles deck. But Thalia Guardian of Thraben I think clearly, better of the two Thalias. Obviously, the promo close-up art from the World Magic Cup qualifiers, just absolutely beautiful. We don't get art like that all the time. And yeah, absolutely an iconic card from Dark Ascension.
I have never played a deck that's happy to see this card. Living End doesn't want to see it. Ad Nauseam doesn't want to see it. Legacy Dredge doesn't want to see it. I run 12 lands, girl. Don't do this to me. When I'm streaming, I have a hashtag that I use. It's basically F-Thalia, because my chat knows that if I see Thalia, I'm not happy. Like, this card is trash.
You know, it's weird how people, players on Magic Online don't care at all about promo versions of stuff. This is a $70 paper card.
Yep.
You can get it online for 65 cents. It's just, they just don't care. It's just not a big deal. Yeah. It's just whatever. It's so funny to me. It kills me because that Steve Argyle bit, I mean, that piece is amazing. One of the most unique arts in Magic, period, I think. And yeah, it's just, they don't care. It's like a couple quarters. Who cares? Whatever. Aaron, what's number 6?
My number 6 is the first example of the anti-hate that I kind of talked about earlier in the show, where this is a card that isn't specifically hating against a deck, but it's protecting your deck from the hate that you're going to be facing. This card is typically a legacy sideboard card. This is the reason why the Ad Nauseam Tendrils decks tend to run greens. They can make sure that their combo can go off and that they can do the things they want to do against those pesky counter spells. I've mentioned before, I'm an only child. Like, sometimes I just want to do what I want to do. Don't talk to me, don't touch me, don't look at me. And no card exemplifies this more than Xantid Swarm. So Xantid Swarm is 1 green. It's a 0/1. Yep. Creature insect with flying. Whenever Xantid Swarm attacks 4/0, defending player can't cast spells this turn. So typically, if you're playing a deck like Ad Nauseam Tendrils, you have no creatures. And so decks are probably taking out their lightning bolts or taking out their swords. And so you slam this and you attack for literally nothing, but you're getting that silence effect. You're getting that leave me alone effect, where you're free to combo off and you don't have to worry about any counter magic that your opponent might have. And so this is a very important card for those decks. We got a watered down version recently in Hope of Girapur, which never really took off. But for a while there was that effect was really like, oh, cool, it's on a colorless body. This is awesome. But it never really took off. But this was the original, and this card still sees play. Like I said, it's the reason why Ant runs green if you decide to go green. And there's just nothing else really like it. It's just a very unique way of just getting to do what you want to do.
One of the sad reprints in Eternal Masters.
Yeah.
Like, you pay $10 for your pack, you rip that sucker open, and there's a Xantid Swarm looking at you.
Right. Yeah, Xantid Swarm is a weird one for sure. Definitely inspired the Hope of Girapur, which the Affinity aficionados are playing as a one-of in the main deck, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware, I should say. I know Peter Tubergen, aka the Pepsi Hat, is like the major Affinity aficionado on the East Coast SCG tours. He is always playing one Hope of Girapur. Also a colorless Brawl Commander, legal, unless you want to play, Karn Scion of Urza. If that's the colorless one you want to play. But yeah, definitely Xantid Swarm. I've cast my fair share of Xantid Swarms when I've played Storm in tournaments. It's a darn good card, and it shuts people off. And certainly much more mana efficient to invest 1 mana on a turn before, as opposed to having to play Silence or Abeyance or other effects that are, City of Solitude, for example, other of these anti-hate cards that are like, all right, you can't Force of Will me on my turn. You're going to have to do something else.
For what it's worth, I do love City of Solitude. It was one of my...
Oh, I love all those.
The art.
The art. It even to this day, it's blown me away. And it's currently a $23 card for no reason that it's on the reserve list.
Yeah. Visions, yeah?
Yes. I loved it from the moment I saw it. It was never any good, but I loved it from the moment I saw it.
I've played a couple City of Solitudes. I've played all those cards that I just mentioned. Don't get me wrong.
Great.
I played some bad cards. All right.
Well, I
know.
I missed the entire Xanadu Swarm train. Like, when I came back to Magic and sort of mirrored in right before Darksteel, it's gone. Essentially, like, its time in the sun is gone. It was played in older formats, which I never played. So, I just kind of just saw it as a weird oddity, and now it's 29 cents. Okay. All right. Moving here to number 5. Aaron, what's your number 5?
The only thing I love more than killing creatures is killing creatures for free. This is another legacy sideboard card that I have dabbled with in Reanimator as a way to deal with them Thalias that Ruben loves so much. It's also a really nice thing to do in the Ant decks, the Reanimator decks, because odds are, if you have a swamp and they got a plains, you're in for a really good time. Number 5 is Massacre. So Massacre is 2 and 2 black from Nemesis. It says if an opponent controls a plains and you control a swamp, you can play Massacre without paying its mana cost for free. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Oh my god, it just feels like a hug from Jesus. Like the arms are just wrapping so tight around you. Jesus is sniffing your hair. It's just great. And the art, the sort of devious smile of Krovax, the really close-up shot of like his mangled teeth, the fire in his eyes. I mean, the art is brilliant. Pete Venters. But yeah, there's just nothing better, especially for the Thalias, because they love to tax you. And so, you may have to pay 1 for this, but that's fine. You'll pay 1 for a -2/-2 board wipe. And I am never sad when I'm casting a Massacre.
Yeah, this was a card that used to be, just an incredible metagame changer. It was back in Mercadian Masks, block when they were like, we'll do free spells again. That didn't break anything, and we're not literally trying to reset the power level from this insane block we just printed, but whatever, who cares? It's fine.
Yeah.
Still fun to always pay 0 for your stuff. And again, if I'm reading this correctly, Thalia doesn't affect this because it adds to the mana cost and you don't pay it. Is that right?
I thought you still had to.
I know you still have to pay the 1. Max Khan just tweeted out a ordering of the 9 things you have to do in order to cast a spell, and I think in level 5 you add the reduction and then the addition and then Trinosphere.
Because I know even Living End you still have to pay the 1. Like if you cascade into a Living End with Thalia, you got to pay the 1.
Yeah, I think that's how it works.
That
but in
sounds
any
YouTube comments will let us know.
Yeah.
Don't worry, the pharmacist judge, help us out here. We need to know. It's fine.
This was actually part of a cycle of free spells that required your opponents to have a corresponding land to yours. And some of those also see play. Submerges are a popular card for the Tarmogoyf Blue Deck Mirrors, for example. The other ones don't see as much play, but they certainly did in Standard. Massacre, however, spectacularly good to this day. You can wish for 1 in those Burning Wish kind of either the Tin Fins decks or any of those sort of Burning Wish combo decks. You want to get your 1 extra Massacre. Tess, for example. Just an absolutely back-breaking sideboard card.
That's awesome. Ruben, what's number 5?
My number 5 is 1 of 2 hires on someone else's list.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about my number 5. And I thought you were going to name it earlier when you talk about Engineered Plague because it was very similar in that this was printed in Urza's block. This was later reprinted in 7th edition. And it's a really interesting hate spell. And in terms of, it was one of the old school, but it was one of those that kind of...
Is it what I think it is?
In the right way. And it's awesome that you can... It's all about limiting. It's all about telling people it's okay. You get 1 spell a turn with Arcane Laboratory. That's all you get. Arcane Laboratory is originally from Urza's Saga. It's a blue and 2 generic mana uncommon enchantment. Each player cannot play more than 1 spell each turn. That's what it does. You just can't do it. The end. You get 1. Everybody gets 1. Everybody gets 1.
Another, we have the Rule of Law, we have Eidolon of Rhetoric. This is another effect that we've seen later on in the game, and another one of those effects that I'm really happy that we have. And I think Ethersworn Canonist does the same thing too. And so you'd be surprised, how much of a damper this can put on certain decks. Like with Ad Nauseam, I have to do something at end of turn and then pass and then do my thing. Like it's a bit of a hurdle, but it's very powerful.
Yeah, it's really, and so for what it's worth, the way I kind of came to Arcane Laboratory is that I chose the OG. Rule of Law showed up in Mirrodin. Arcane Canada showed up. Yeah, and Eidolon showed up even after that. So, there's plenty of ways, that we restrict to 1 spell a turn, but I was like, you know what? I'm going back to the original. And the original was Arcane Laboratory.
The thing I really like about Arcane Lab as a hate card is that not only does it turn off opposing strategies and cards like Arcane Lab, but it protects itself in a weird way, right? Like you play Arcane Lab and then you have Force of Will as backup, and your opponent has their one spell a turn. So if they try to kill the lab, that's their spell. They can't cast a counter spell to counter your Force of Will. And so you're able to protect it much more efficiently, which I think is great. Arcane Lab's a spectacularly good card. Obviously, Urza's Block was just a ridiculous time to be alive in Magic the Gathering. Interesting time for me to come into the game. And initially, Mark Rosewater says, at least this is the tale, designed Urza's Block initially in his mind as an enchantment block, not as an artifact block.
Right.
Which is why you have things like Replenish and lots of Enchantress of the Enchantress cards. There are a lot of them in that set. Things like Sarah's Sanctum. But of course, we also got Tinker and Tolarian Academy,
Time Spiral, and all
Time Spiral, and Jar, and all those things.
My
but
God.
but yeah.
They didn't know what they didn't know. And yes, the taxing thing and the stopping thing is a white thing these days. But again,
sure.
I went old school.
I like it.
All right. So we're going to move on here to number 4. We're starting to get into the heavy hitters at this point.
Yeah.
Ruben, what's your number 4?
Yeah, talk about heavy hitters. I had 2 cards that essentially do the same thing at my number 4, but I'll talk about the one that I think is the most iconic, being that it was the one that people were clamoring for the reprint most, which it got in Eternal Masters. It got new art in that set as well. It's one of the most popular sideboard cards in Legacy and Pauper. Reprinted a ton, still a $3 common/uncommon. Pyroblast is just so ubiquitous, so powerful, so good. Obviously, Red Elemental Blast does a very similar thing, but let's go with the newly printed fresh text box Pyroblast. 1 red mana instant uncommon. Choose one. Counter target spell if it's blue, or destroy target permanent if it's blue. Just sideboards everywhere. In every if the deck says Delver and has 4 Delvers in the main deck, odds are it's got at least 3 of these in the sideboard. I've seen these in the sideboard of Pauper Affinity.
I see them in the main deck.
Yeah, it's main deck in the Deep Hours, like the Scred, the blue red Scred Pauper deck. That's you play your fairy miscreant and then put in a Deep Hours and then you destroy your opponent's Deep Hours and things like that. Popular in all sorts of control decks. Excellent with Snapcaster Mage. All the 4-color control decks. I could go on forever saying which decks this card is in the sideboard of, but it's one of, if not the most ubiquitous sideboard cards in 2 different formats.
You forgot a very important deck, Ruben. I'm surprised you didn't name this, but you Painter Servant kids love to run this because you name the color.
It's a main deck card. It's a main deck card.
I'm just saying, though, you guys love to make everything blue and then be like, destroy your land because it's blue.
Sure. It's not so much a hate card in the Painter deck, so much as it's a combo card in the Painter deck. But I absolutely have main decked. My best Grand Prix finish ever was at Grand Prix Chicago in 2009, where I played Painter. I had 4 main deck Red Blasts, 4 main deck Pyroblasts, and 4 main deck active Volcano.
Bless your heart.
Because I was using everything blue. And also everyone was playing blue anyway, so...
Yeah, I mean, main deckable in Vintage, certainly. There's if you're playing a format where blue is dominant, you really can't go wrong with this card. And so, yeah, that card's fantastic. I've certainly had Narcomoebas destroyed with it, or get that one sassy opponent where you cast a Careful Study, and they're like, Blast. I'm like, why are you like this?
Yeah, this is one of those weird quirks where Red Elemental Blast is not legal in Pauper, even though it's certainly been common enough in paper, but it's not been online, and that's how they define the format. And Pauper, to this day, is still not a legal format. Wizards, #make Pauper a real format. Seriously. Pyroblast is also really cool and very unique in that you can target anything. It doesn't matter. If that's a spell... later on, we care if it's blue, but when we're targeting, it's just a spell. Right. It's a permanent,
so you
whatever.
can get rid of Phantasmal images and things like that. You can also take opponents' permanents that aren't blue with your Dak Faden ultimate.
Had that happen once.
Which makes it better than Red Elemental Blast in that case. Which Red Elemental Blast got a reprint in M25, so we've got reprints with new art for both of them.
Right. So,
but yeah, definitely Pyroblast is the choice.
Yeah, Pyroblast is sweet. First showed up in Ice Age, my first set, and yeah, it's still awesome to this day, which is great to say. All right, so Aaron, what's your number 4?
So we're getting into the cards that most people may not think too highly of, but they're the cards that make me feel something. They are the cards that I feel good about when I'm playing. And my number 4 is particularly one of those cards. If you ever see me on camera in a feature match, I like to, and in general, I tend to play with my graveyard fanned out in rows, as most people who play Dredge do. And Chad always loses their minds. They don't know why I do it. They hate that I do it. But in my mind, I'm doing you a courtesy because that's where all the relevant information is. And I want you to know exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to do everything above board. I'm not trying to be slimy. I don't want any surprises. But no matter how hard I try to put everything in front of you, there is one card that my opponents never see. It's right there in front of you, and they walk into it every time. And when they do, I feel such joy. My number 4 is Vengeful Pharaoh. So Vengeful Pharaoh is 2 and 3 black. Let me get there.
Oh, boy.
So Vengeful Pharaoh is 2 and 3 black. It's from Magic 2012. It's a creature type zombie 5/4. Card text says Death Touch. And then it says, whenever combat damage is dealt to you or a planeswalker you control, if Vengeful Pharaoh is in your graveyard, destroy the attacking creature, or destroy target attacking creature, and then put Vengeful Pharaoh on top of your library. So back when Dredge was known as Zombie Loam, you could pitch this at instant speed to your zombie infestation. And so if you were playing against an opposing creature deck, you're obviously not running any removal, but you just whoop. And then they walk into it, and then you dredge, and it goes right back to your graveyard. And so you essentially build this wall. And then if you have something like Gnawed of the Bone, you get to the point where you whittle down enough creatures, you gain 30 life, and you do it all over again. And so this was a great way to deal with opposing creature strategies. This is a great thing you can do with Bazaar. You can also just sort of Bazaar and pitch it if you want to deal with Containment Priests. But this is just one of those cards against the creature matchups that everybody, no matter how much I try to put everything out there, people walk into it all the time, and it just feels amazing. You can also do some tricksy things if they attack with multiple creatures. So for example, you can block the biggest creature, let like the littlest creature get through, but then choose to destroy the other attacking creature. It doesn't have to be the same creature that actually dealt damage to you. So you might get, you have a little 1/1 Lingering Souls, and you're like, that's cool, destroy that Tarmogoyf that went with you. And they're like, well, I blocked the Tarmogoyf. I know, but it didn't say which attacking creature. And so lots of neat little rules, things you can do, but I just love the joy that comes when people walk into it.
That's terrific. This is one I hadn't even really thought about, honestly. It's already a $2 and $2.50 card, only printed once in Magic 2012. Is one of the cards that Wizards continues to kind of, whenever they bring it up, even in a theoretical, hypothetical sense, if a card did X or a card did Y. And you saw it recently with the Great Designer Search. Whenever anybody did anything like this, it was like, there's memory issues. There's going to be memory issues about it. They're going to forget.
Attest.
Yeah, they're going to forget the so-and-so. And I'm like, I know, but look how cool this card is because it does what it does, right?
And I'm not too proud to say I have hardcast a Vengeful Pharaoh. It is it's fine.
Nothing wrong. It's good, clean living.
I
right there.
was flabbergasted that this was not reprinted in Amonkhet.
Yes,
I was shocked beyond belief that this did not see play in either of those sets, or see print in either of those sets. I thought this was a shoe-in for when we went to the Egyptian-themed world. And again, maybe when we go back, a la Silent Gravestone, when we go back to Amonkhet, we will get a return of the Pharaoh.
Well, again, top 4 heavy hitters, right? Some serious hate going on up in here, and we're going to stop things. We're going to turn it off. We're going to say, you know what? It's real cute. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. You got to put it. You got to be quiet. You got to be real quiet. You got to be silent. You got to have a stony silence. Okay, you're gonna take your little wacky arcbound whatevers and shut up. Nothing. I don't even like your lands. Your lands are crap. You can do anything. You're making too much noise on the other side of the table. Hush it now. It's a white and a generic mana for a rare from Innistrad originally. It was also reprinted in Modern Masters 2017. It is a rare enchantment. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. That includes lands. There's no little but mana abilities. No. Shut it. 0. Your deck does nothing. Your deck is nothing. The end. Go
main
away.
deckable in Vintage. The Jeskai decks are not opposed to putting at least one or two of them in the main deck because Shops is so popular and there's so many artifacts in the format. Yeah, the card is hilarious, and it's pretty much their version of Rest in Peace. And but you know, Affinity with a good hand, if you're on the draw, Affinity can sneeze out their hand and sometimes just get you with a bunch of scrawny creatures. I have seen that happen before.
For sure, I've definitely seen a player play a Stony Silence and then just that's cute. Take 85 on turn 3. Stony Silence was my number 5.
Nice.
Perhaps not the first, but certainly one of the most popular and most ubiquitous of the colorless and a white enchantment hate cards. Things like Suppression Field, Erin's favorite Rest in Peace, which I'm hoping is number 1 on her list. That would be great. But there's a lot of cards that have this sort of effect that are like colorless and white enchantment. This is our wheelhouse. This is what we do. We shut down this thing, and Stony Silence is perfect for that.
Yeah, it's a hammer solving, you know, a heck of a problem, like a big hammer solving the nail. That nail is dead. It's dead.
Love it.
Move here to number 3. Now, we had just spoke of what again, heavy hitters, white and generic mana. Some would call the bane of Erin's existence. Some would say.
So it's not number 1 on her list.
Really?
All right, fine.
Some would say.
I can accept.
You gotta give it up. Look, what some things hate so hard. They define what's a hate card. When somebody's like, "What's a hate card, Mr. Irwin? What does that mean?" And I'm like, "All right, class," and like I start like drawing like the little wavy stuff that comes up off the body and Rest in Peace, because that's the hate card. That's what you hate it. It's a white and a generic mana for a rare that was printed 2 times. Return to Ravnica and Masters 25.
Too many.
Too many for Erin's taste. It's a white and a generic mana enchantment. When Rest in Peace enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all graveyards. If a card or token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. It says no. This is zilch. Nada. You see it, graveyard? That's off limits. That's closed. That off limit is just done.
Erin, let's be real. This had to be in our top 10.
Of course. I'm just being facetious.
Of course, I know.
Right.
This one, very close to my top 10 list as well. I thought for sure someone would bring it up, and I'm glad someone did. My heart was beating a little bit that we'd have some, Cranko feedback. We'd have another Rebecca Gay incident where it was just like, how dare you forget about Rest in Peace? And of course, most of the tweets today are saying Rest in Peace to Deathray Shaman. So,
wow.
Yes. I will give you one more thing. I will give, you know what? I've evolved a little bit. Let's give Rest in Peace a little bit of credit. You're forgetting that it's also 1/2 of the Helm of Obedience combo.
Again, yep.
So if you're into that sort of thing, I admit I have cast a Rest in Peace in concert with the Helm before, and that feels pretty fantastic. I have done that. So we'll give it a little something.
Wow, a little something. Well, I mean, again, if nothing else, the artwork, Therese Nielsen.
And the flavor tax. I mean, the idea of the bodies that the Golgari can't take and the souls they can't claim is great.
Wow, that's super cool. So,
great
that said, Ruben, what's your number 3?
Erin, I have another one for you.
Uh-oh.
My number 3, again, remove the whole graveyard, all right? We didn't pick Tormod's Crypt here. We didn't, we talked about Yixla Jailer previously. I briefly considered Awful Snout because I think that card is hilarious and adorable.
As the number 3?
No, I wouldn't put it at number 3. Even Fairy Macabre, which is another free spell, not even a spell, you can't even counter that one. I decided to go with Surgical Extraction for my number 3. Because Surgical is so unique and so interesting that when it was printed, people were like, there's nothing. What is this? How do we do this? People freaked out when this card was first printed in New Phyrexia. It is a Phyrexian black mana, meaning that you can pay it with either a black or 2 white.
It's free.
Is this free?
It's a free spell. Exactly right. For the low cost of a couple of life points, choose target card in a graveyard other than a basic land, search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that card and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. This card was originally printed without the Phyrexian mana, but with Split Second as the card Extirpate, which I learned the meaning of and then proceeded to use in college papers. So thanks, Magic the Gathering, for extending my vocabulary. Surgical Extraction came around, and people were like, oh, it's just Extirpate for free. and then in response to it, I would do things. Like I used to play lands. I used to play a blue lands strategy back in the day with another of my favorite hate cards, In the Eye of Chaos, which did not make my top 10, but that card's awesome. And people were like, oh, Surgical Extraction, remove your Life from the Loam or your whatever. And I'd be like, Cycling Land. GG. Gotcha, idiot. Surgical Extraction is a very popular sideboard card, a very popular tester card, because people bring it in situations in which they shouldn't.
Well, that's the problem is when LSV's telling you you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. This has been described as like the laziest sideboard card in the game because everybody's running it. No one knows why. They bring it in against everything, and I think it's hilarious. Like that's my little jab at them. Is like what are you doing? Like you don't know why you got it, but damn it, you're gonna bring it in against everything.
It became like a weird meme at one point.
Yeah.
You know, the lobotomy effect, the cranial extraction effect, the ability to take a card and then go remove all the copies of it had certainly been seen before. Extra Bait, we thought Extra Bait was as good as it was ever going to get. You can't even counter it. It's as cheap as they can make it. And Wizards is like, hold my beer, because we're going to pay nothing. We're going to pay zero for this.
You know, it's funny. Whenever I used to see people, there's been a lot of discussion about Phyrexian mana and how much of a mistake it is and things like that. And I never really understood what that kerfuffle was about. Like when I look at Gut Shot and I look at Mutagenic Growth, I'm like, this is fine. Right. But then when I see Surgical, it's like, why? I get it now. I get why people say Phyrexian mana is trash. Why is this free? I don't understand.
Surgical, Gitaxian Probe, Dismember. You know, Apostle's Blessing, the entire Infect deck, essentially.
Mental Misstep,
yeah.
I mean,
that one's the big one.
That one's quite the misstep. It's
art. Let's talk about the art, though. Surgical Extraction's art is pretty great. Like the sort of
both
robotic.
Both of the arts, I love.
Surgical Extraction artwork from Steve Belden won awards. That was how good and powerful a piece this is. It's really incredible. The artwork is amazing. The card's still great. It's basically still a $20 card. It's only been reprinted twice, New Phyrexia and Modern Masters 2015. And it's again,
sees play in about 10% of modern sideboards. It's one of the most ubiquitous cards there. Obviously great with Snapcaster Mage. Decks that are really tight on mana. I know that the Legacy Enchantress decks prefer Surgical as their hate card of choice. It's also one of the really good ways to get an edge in the Delver of Secrets mirror match, because when you waste land an opponent's either red or green source, you can Surgical that source, and they have no other lands in their deck that produce that color of mana. So you can cut them off of their Tarmogoyfs and their Nimble Mongoose for the rest of the game if you do it in that way. But for every time you use a Surgical Extraction correctly, there's like 5 where you don't. And so that's the big problem with the card, but certainly deserving of a number 3, I think.
Again, if this is just sort of your default, I'm hating stuff card, you're probably doing it wrong, and you need to back up and just make sure. Just saying. Aaron, what's number 3?
I've learned to put on a really good poker face over the years. You know, when I'm playing ad nauseum, you want to kind of catch the opponent by surprise. You know, you want to be able to close the bear trap on them. You want to act like you don't have the combo even when you do, because you want them to tap out or do something stupid and you can, in response, kill you. In Vintage, you really have to act like the hate, because you know you're going to see some graveyard hate. If you're playing Vintage Dredge, you know you're going to see it. The average deck is running 4 to 8 pieces of graveyard hate. You have to act like it doesn't bother you. And so my favorite thing to do is when you get an opponent who really gets kicking, and they're like Grafdigger's Cage, and you're like, oh yeah, and then they're like 2 cages, and it's like, what am I gonna do? Yeah, and then they're like Crypt, and it's like, oh, you got me, you really got me. My number 3, Serenity. Ha! So Serenity costs 1 and a white. It's from 6th edition. It's an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Every single one. They can't be regenerated. I have 1 for 1 people. I have 2 for 1 people. I have 3 for 1 people. I have 4 for 1 people. And I have 5 for 1 people. This card fills me with so much joy just to sit there and watch them be so proud of themselves for playing their 4 pieces of graveyard hate, and then whoop! Pass the turn. And you leave them with nothing, because it's not uncommon for people in Vintage to keep hands with either no lands or 1 land and a bunch of Moxen. And when all those Moxen go away and you're left with your 1 crappy land. Wow. And I love it. I never leave home without this card if I'm playing Vintage Dredge. We try to make it happen in Legacy, but we run so few lands that you basically need like Lotus Petals, and it never goes off the way you want it to. But damn it, in Vintage, I just love this card so much. I love counting all the things I've done with it, and I just love it so much.
I appreciate anytime we can bring Weatherlight cards onto any list. That's great. I love it. Serenity it's just that sort of loaded gun. It's like, all right, there you go. You got 1 turn. Good luck. Have fun.
And it all goes, and it's because especially because they always tend to. That's really one of those cards where you don't want to play out your whole hand. You hear that sometimes with ley lines. You get people that will open their hand with multiple ley lines, and they're like, "Should I put them all out at once?" And it's like, well, if you get Maelstrom Pulse, it feels really bad. And kind of the same thing with Serenity. If you're facing somebody that's possible, that's capable of keeping Serenity, don't cast all your cages at once because they're all going to go, and you're going to feel like an idiot. I just love it. I love when they walk into my Serenities.
Oh, man, it's terrific. So let's move on here to number 2. I don't have one. It's my only other higher. So somebody thought quite highly of my number 2, as it were. Ruben, what's your number 2?
Same with you, buddy.
All right.
I got a higher as my number 2.
Well, that's very exciting. Aaron, what's your number 2? Oh, boy.
Something broken is about to happen.
Something busted. Something broke it.
So my number 2 is a very narrow card. It's not good against a lot of decks. But when you find the deck it's good against, there's nothing better than watching your opponent's face and watching their morale sink every time you cast it, because you can effectively just loop it. And because it's so good, they're just never going to be able to do anything. And so it's very good against Infect. It's very good against Affinity. My number 2 is Dark Blast. So Dark Blast is 1 and a black. It has stretch 3, and it's very simple. It just says target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So basically, you just Dark Blast.
No, it's just 1 black.
Creature dies, and then
Just
next
1
turn,
black, yeah.
Dark Blast.
Yeah, you had said black and 1, and I was like, no, that card's
And
1
then-
black mana.
And you watch your opponent's face just sink, and then you're like, Dark Blast. And they just have nothing. So like you get like the Soul Sisters decks, or you get like Affinity, or you get Infect, and you just run it back, and they don't even bother anymore, and it just feels amazing. Sorry.
Yeah.
I love it.
Dark Blast is a spectacularly good card. Really good, especially obviously in Dredge and the decks that like to use their graveyards. Things like the Gitrog monster or Hollow One like it in their main deck, maybe in their sideboard. Esper Stoneblade's been known to use a copy of Dark Blast in the past. It's also good at killing 2/2s, keep in mind, because you can upkeep Dark Blast, dredge it back, upkeep it, or main phase it and kill off a Gadok Teague or Kuzali Pride Mage or something like that.
Also useful for killing your own things, particularly in Modern. The blue-white decks love their Path to Exile if they love their Settle the Wreckages. And so dark blasting your own Bloodghast can avoid it getting exiled, bring it right back to the graveyard, and where you can bring it back again. It's just so versatile. But against the right decks, you just watch your opponents just little by little by little just chip away at them. It's so good.
And they get crushed. And they die.
And they always look at you like, is you just going to bring it back again? It's like, Dark Blast.
Yeah, that's how this works. It comes back over and over again.
I love it.
That's the fun part.
Yeah.
All right, so let's turn the corner here to number 1. Oh, boy. Ruben, what's your number 1?
It takes a special kind of card for the Magic Man Sam, a.k.a. Ristic Studies, to make a video on it specifically. Ooh. We've had specials on Lightning Bolt. We've had specials on Mirror Gallery. We just had a special on Giant Spider come out over the past day or two. And he had an episode of Ristic Studies entitled We Need the Needle. We Need the Needle, in which he said that we always need to have Pithing Needle in one form or fashion or another in Standard at all times. He says, quote, "It's one of the game's most narrow and effective designs, and a card with a great history of corner case bad beat stories."
Oh, yeah.
And for that reason and many more, Pithing Needle's my number 1. So Pithing Needle was originally from the Evan Irwin designed, right? I believe you designed this set, Saviors of Kamigawa.
At this point, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
The
it's
absolute
like the only
train
saving grace of Saviors, right?
It's one of the only things that it was worth anything at all.
For a lone 1 colorless mana, you get an artifact that says, as Pithing Needle enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. Over the years, this has been used on everything from even Deathrite Shaman, because technically that's not a mana ability. The colon is in a weird spot there. You can name opposing things that Splinter Twin might be put on, things like Deceiver Exarch. You can name Swamp in certain metagames when Underworld Connections was popular. You can name Birthing Pod, anything.
Bag down.
Yep, exactly. You can name Umezawa's Jite. Lots of senseis. Divining Top is a big one as well. Lots of great things to name with Pithing Needle. Of course, Sorceress Spyglass is the current example of a Pithing Needle effect in Standard, which was so ubiquitous and powerful that it was banned in the Brawl format.
So let's add a reveal hand aspect to it. Like,
right?
Oh.
Yeah, so you can do it on the play.
Like, I'll take Super Pithing Needle. It's fine. I'll pay extra mana for the peak. It's cool. You got me. I mean, nowadays, Saviors of Kamigawa has like 10 cards or so that are worth more than Pithing Needle. That's because longevity and lack of cards and reprint. Well, and there's legends. It's just about the legend set and this EDH thing, and that's great. That's because Commander. But when it showed up in Standard, it was Pithing Needle, Kataki War's Wage, and like cards that no one cared about at all. Like actual zero. It was, and I've told this story multiple times. Like while Cold Snap was the saddest pre-release, Saviors was right there, just neck and neck. Because when we won a box of cards at the pre-release, and we opened the whole box of cards on the drive home, we got one Pithing Needle, and we were happy about it because that was the only thing the whole set had going for it. These days, it's like, ooh, Sakashima the Imposter Suite and Mirror in the Moaning Well, and all. It's like, that's great. But back then, no, it was complete garbage, and we were sad. So, Aaron, what's your number one?
We've kind of talked about different flavors of hate. We've talked about having very efficient answers to certain strategies at large. We've talked about cards that go after certain colors and certain colors of permanence. But I can't think of anything more hateful than doing something on turn one that was never meant to be played on turn one that also makes it so you cannot play the game. My number one is Iona's Shield of Emeria. So Iona's 6 and 3 white. She's a legendary creature angel, a 7/7 with flying. As she enters the battlefield, choose a color. Your opponents cannot cast spells of this chosen color. Now 9 mana is a lot of mana. How about a turn 1 Iona against elves? How about a turn 1 Iona against Burn? Or a turn 1 Iona against High Tide? Race ya. I can't think of anything more hateful than a 7/7 on turn 1 naming the color of the deck that you play, and that is the only color that you play, and you have no way to deal with that. I have reanimated this as part of Legacy Reanimator. I have dredged into this. I've had obnoxious turn 1s, and nothing feels better than when you know that your opponent is playing a certain color deck, or primarily a certain color deck, and being able to do this sooner than it was ever meant to be played, and just lock them out of the game at that point. It feels amazing. And so when I think of hateful things you can do, looping Dark Blast is fun, 5 for winning somebody with Serenity, but there's nothing sweeter than getting a turn 1, turn 2 Iona and just saying, you're going to watch.
I mean, you could get that in the Vintage Cube that just came out for Magic Online. There's a Reanimator deck. She's definitely in the Cube. I've seen it, I've reanimated her myself. And in the Cube, you kind of hit that, which color do I choose? Because most people are 2 colors. And you're just like, if I choose the wrong color, I'm going to look like an idiot.
I've done that.
Because I'm playing against this blue-black deck, right? And I'm just like, well, if I name black, obviously there's a lot of removal spells, and that's fine. But if I don't name blue, and they control magic this thing, I'm going to look like a doofus. So I named blue, and they immediately Doomblade it, which is fine. Whatever, but... Yeah, the cookie crumbles. It's still an incredible angel. She's still awesome. She was a mythic from Zendikar in Modern Masters 2015. Also showed up in From the Vault Angels. It's still worth $12, and there's a reason. It's because she's incredibly powerful.
I think one of the best games I ever played. I was at a Legacy 1K one time, and it was the Reanimator Mirror. Mm-hmm. We played 3 games. None of them went past turn 1. So game 1, turn 1, Iona. We go to game 2, turn 1 Iona, and then game 3, because you named Reanimator Black and the Reanimator Mirror, and so and our opponents were horrified. They were like, "You guys, how are you guys done already?" And it's like Reanimator.
They had it. I had it. They had it.
It's not just turn 1, by the way. There are decks that have done well in the past that are paying retail for Iona. Most well known probably is LSV at Grand Prix Lincoln, better known as Grand Prix Hoth. In 2012, he was playing blue-white Tron trying to get Ionas into play for the low cost of 9 mana. Of course, the Jeskai Ascendancy decks also had these in their sideboard. Had probably had one of in their sideboard to be able to cast, to be able to prevent people from messing with them later in the game. Oh, and also, by the way, Reanimator and Dredge and Gifts Control and all those kind of decks as well. Excellent choice. Absolutely.
Terrific card. And moving here to my number 1, which through the process of elimination is also Ruben's number 2.
Oh!
Which is cool, which is nice.
Yeah.
You have cards that, and these are my favorite. It was a hate card that was made way back in the day. So back in my day, rocks were soft and all. No one cared about this thing. It's dumb. It's whatever.
Yep.
It's one of those cards that, as time goes on, it's going to automatically gain some amount of value due to what it does. Due to what it hates. Right? If it only hates a thing there's not a lot of back in the day, no one really cares about it. Whatever. But then one day I just kind of woke up and I was like, Blood Moon's $50? What the hell is why is Blood Moon $50?
Yes.
This card was literal trash from Chronicles. I swear I have seen rows of this terrible card that nobody wanted in any fashion. It didn't get anywhere close to playable until Modern shows up, and it's like, oh yeah, wait, I'm literally a pillar of the format. Like, this thing shows up in Modern Masters 2017, Masters 25, and it's still $20. It's had like 8 printings. Clearly, starting with a dark, which is great. Blood Moon is 2 red.
That's at the dark.
I'm sorry, Blood Moon is a red and 2 generic mana for a rare enchantment, non-basic lands or mountains. 1 sentence, 1 beautiful, just 4 amazing words, and it just wrecks a format. It just wrecks it. Just completely just destroys it in many, many ways. A lot of people hate it. A lot of people want to see it gone. Some people think that it glues the format together, much like Force of Will does in Legacy. Blood Moon, I'm telling you, from a guy, when you started playing an Ice Age and Blood Moon showed up in Chronicles, everyone just rolled their eyes and moved on, and it was like, congratulations, bleh. You got your 20-cent rare. Seriously, this
free wins. I remember it's very popular in the mono red prison decks. You run 4 copies of this in Magus of the Moon. Magus of the Moon being one of the few good Maguses out there. But when you're running things like Simeon Spirit Guide and Chrome Mox, a turn 1 Blood Moon can just get you there. I remember poor Dave Williams. We were playing Vintage in the Vintage Super League, and he ran no basics. He had 0 basics, and so when I'm rushing on a turn 2 Blood Moon, he has nothing. And yeah, the card is a lot of conscience. Very polarizing card. Like you said, there are some people who feel that it asks you to respect it and to build your deck expecting that card and that you should have some sort of answer to it. And a lot of decks don't really respect it, and they don't run enough basics, and they don't run enough fetches, or they don't, just understand how to deal with it, and so they think the card is too good. And I think I'm one of the people where I think that Blood Moon used to have a very noble purpose, and that it really does sort of prevent the greedy decks and the Trons and the Cloud Posts and things like that. But it's kind of gone the way of Surgical Extraction, where it went from being a scalpel-like tool to sort of a hammer, where people are just sort of putting it in everything, and there's a lot of just kind of incidental harm that it causes. And so I think by itself it's not inherently bad. I just think the way that people kind of use it, it's just become a very brute tactic as opposed to being very precise.
Yeah. A super ubiquitous card in Modern in particular, obviously, with the Blue Moon strategies and the Blue-Red Breach decks in particular like it a lot. Even decks like Mardu Pyromancer and Jeskai Control can use it in their sideboard. Obviously, in Legacy, it's a big part of the Dragon Stompy strategy and the Painted Stone decks. If you guys want to have if you have an extra 15 seconds, go look up Ruben Bressler versus Matt Hoey from Star City Games Cincinnati in 2013. The second shortest game 1 ever. I was recently taken down after an Affinity turn 2 scoop from Todd Stevens.
What did you do?
I was playing as Matt Hoey in the semifinals of the Legacy Open in Cincinnati in 2013. He was on Bug. What was that? Shardless Bug, and I was playing Painted Stone, and I went turn 1 Ancient Tomb, Simeon Spirit Guide, Blood Moon, and my opponent conceded, and we moved to game 2. That'll do that sometimes.
This is like a thing. It used to be really good at like getting rid of like ingrown toenails, and now it just chops the foot off. That's what it does. That's where you went. That's the escalation. It does things. It kills things dead. It used to be like, that's a weird, funny thing. Maybe one day we'll play it. Oh God, you got it out turn 1. I'm dead. it just kind of ramps up. And for those who hadn't noticed, my number 2 was Pithy Needle, which was Ruben's number 1 again by process.
So now whenever you see a card, as we saw with M19, there's Alpine Moon coming out. If there is a moon effect, it's harkening back to Blood Moon. Obviously, we had Magus. We had Blood Sun. There we go. Blood or Moon, taking inspiration from either side. We had the Magus of the Moon in Future Sight. We have the Moon Eating Dog, which doesn't do anything, but I just wanted to say Moon Eating Dog because I think it's fun.
Because it's still very, very funny. That said, that was our top 10 hate cards. You'll see them on screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we didn't talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben.
I hate you so much.
So, you just... Moving to our final slide.
Leave us your hate in the comments this week.
Oh, boy. That's what
it's YouTube, and that's what we get.
That's what we want to foster around here, the good feelings. All right. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching and listening, and hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at Magic Mics, on Twitter at Magic Mics Cast, our Magic Mics subreddit, and like the Magic Mics page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at magicmicspodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at magicmicspodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week. Same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mics. Good night, everybody.